When I was 23, I made the mistake of trusting my parents with something more valuable than money, my loyalty. My name's Aaron, and I'm 32 now, but this story starts 9 years ago, back when I thought family meant the people who had your back no matter what. Back when I believed in things like fairness and gratitude. Back when I still called my dad for advice instead of sending his calls straight to voicemail. I was living in the guest house behind my parents' place, a modest but decent one-story ranch house on the outskirts of Sacramento. Nothing fancy, but the yard was big, and the guest house had its own entrance, kitchen, and enough space to feel like my own. After college, I hadn't wanted to move far away. My mom had just recovered from a surgery, my younger sister, Tessa, was still finishing school, and my dad had started hinting he could use help keeping up with bills. I figured I could stay a couple of years, help with expenses, and build up savings before buying a place of my own. That couple of years turned into nearly a decade. It started small. At first, I paid a couple $100 a month toward utilities, even though I was barely using any. Then, when I got a better job as an IT consultant, Dad sat me down one evening and asked if I'd be willing to take over the property tax payments for the house. It would be a huge help, he said, looking tired in a way that made it hard to say no. Just until we get things sorted out. That just until turned into me quietly footing the property tax bill every year. We're talking thousands of dollars annually, money I could have been saving, investing, or putting toward my own future. But at the time, it didn't feel like a sacrifice. It felt like something a good son did. I wasn't paying rent, and I was still using their land. It made sense. It felt fair. But looking back, I think the real reason I kept doing it was because I thought I was building something. Not just with my money, but with my actions. I believed I was investing in something that would one day become part of my future. That maybe, one day, the house would be jointly ours, mine and my sister's. Or even just mine, considering how much I contributed. I never asked for it outright. I just assumed my parents would be fair. That they'd remember who'd stepped up when they were struggling. Tessa and I had always had a complicated relationship. She was the golden child, no doubt about it. Ever since we were kids, she had this ability to make our parents melt. One tear, one sigh, one little complaint, and suddenly it was all hands on deck to make her world perfect again. She was 5 years younger than me and treated me more like an annoying uncle than an older brother. She never had to clean up after herself. Never got scolded when she crashed the car or forgot to pay her own phone bill. Somehow, it always became my job to fix her messes. She's still growing, Mom would say. You're older, you should understand. Even now, I can hear those words. You should understand. Anyway, back to the house. For years, I kept paying those taxes. My parents never asked twice, never offered to split the bill, and Tessa, who had long since moved out and was living in a downtown apartment with her fiancé, never even acknowledged it. That part always stung a little. She acted like the house was still just Mom and Dad's problem, like she had no stake in it. Meanwhile, I'd be up at 2 a.m. on the county website, making sure the payment posted before the deadline. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't dramatic. But it mattered. Things started to shift a bit 2 years ago, after my mom's second surgery. She'd been diagnosed with something more serious this time, and it shook all of us. I was at the hospital nearly every day, helping with post-op care, running errands, bringing her food she actually liked. Tessa visited once a week, usually with a Starbucks in hand and some excuse about how busy work was. I didn't say anything. I never did. But I could feel the resentment start to bubble under the surface. It's one thing to be taken for granted. It's another to see someone else praised for doing the bare minimum while you carry the load in silence. And then came the conversation that should have tipped me off. It was a sunny Sunday afternoon, and I'd just finished mowing the lawn, both the front and the back, as usual. Dad came out with 2 beers and handed me one like it was some kind of reward. We sat on the porch, and he started talking about the future and making sure things were in order. I've been thinking, he said, about the house. About making sure it goes to someone who'll really appreciate it. My stomach flipped, but I kept my face neutral. Yeah. Your sister's got a good head on her shoulders now, he continued, totally missing the irony. And with her getting married soon, it just makes sense to give her a little stability. I paused. Wait, what do you mean? Give her stability. He waved his hand like it was no big deal. We're thinking of adding her to the deed. Joint ownership, you know. Just in case something happens down the line. It's safer that way. That was the first time I felt the floor start to tilt. I cleared my throat. Are you planning to add me too? Dad didn't look at me. He took a sip of his beer, then said, "You've always said you wanted to get your own place eventually. We figured you wouldn't want to be tied down." It felt like a slap. All those years, all those payments, all those quiet sacrifices. And now they were just going to sign it over to Tessa like I was some tenant passing through. I didn't say anything that day. Not really. I nodded, made some neutral comment, and went back to my guest house feeling like I was standing on someone else's foundation. Like I'd spent years building a house of cards, and someone had just sneezed. A week later, I checked the county records online. My hands were shaking as I typed in the address. There it was. Clear as day. Tessa Marie Underwood, added to the deed as a co-owner. My name? Nowhere. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen. Not angry. Not even sad at first. Just hollow. Like something had quietly been stolen from me, and no one even thought it was worth mentioning. That's when I made my decision. I didn't yell. I didn't confront them. I didn't send angry texts or demand an explanation. I just stopped. Stopped mowing the lawn. Stopped running errands. And most importantly, stopped paying the property taxes. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was just clarity. If they wanted to treat me like a guest, I'd stop acting like a landlord. At first, nothing happened. A month passed. Then another. I went about my life like nothing had changed. I was polite but distant. I started researching apartments, looking into condo listings, quietly packing away things I cared about. And then, on a random Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Dad. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, it rang again. This time I answered. His voice was tight. Panicked. "Aaron, why is there a foreclosure notice on the front door?" I leaned back in my chair, the ghost of a smile creeping onto my face. I didn't shout. I didn't gloat. I just said, "Ask the homeowner." And then I hung up. That was the moment everything really began to unravel. After that call, the silence was almost louder than the words that had passed between us. I expected an explosion. I thought maybe Dad would come knocking, yelling, demanding an explanation. But no, what I got instead was avoidance. Tense silence from the main house. Passive-aggressive texts from Mom like, "Are you doing okay, sweetie? And Tessa said you've been distant lately. Hope everything's all right." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. They knew exactly why I'd gone quiet. The funny thing is, I think they expected me to cave first. Like I'd eventually come around, get over it, and resume playing the dutiful son. The dependable one. The one they could count on to show up even when they treated me like an afterthought. That's always been the dynamic. Tessa creates the mess, I clean it up. They make decisions, I accept them. They screw me over, I stay quiet. But not this time. That one sentence, "Ask the homeowner," was the first time I'd set a boundary so hard it echoed. And the thing about boundaries is, people who benefit from your lack of them never take it well when you finally draw a line. It started subtly. Little things. I'd come home from work and find the gate locked, even though it never had been before. The trash bins from the guest house would be dragged back to the side of the property before I got a chance to bring them in. Clearly some passive-aggressive move, because it never came with a note or message, just done without a word. Then one Sunday, I walked outside to find my car boxed in. Tessa's little white SUV was parked behind it, her windows down, music playing, but no one in sight. I waited 15 minutes. Nothing. Knocked on the main house door. No answer. Finally, I texted her. "Can you move your car? I need to leave." No reply. Another 10 minutes passed before she strolled out, sunglasses on, iced coffee in hand, and moved her car without acknowledging me. I didn't bother speaking either. It was like they'd flipped a switch, and now I was just invisible. A background character in their life. And Tessa? She was thriving in her role as the new co-owner. She'd started coming by more often, rearranging things in the garage, barking orders at Dad like she was running the place. She even got a new welcome mat for the front door that said, "The Underwoods, EST 2023. It made me want to throw up. Then came the family dinner. It was late September, around my mom's birthday. I hadn't been invited, obviously, but Mom texted me the day before asking if I could pop in for cake. Against my better judgment, I said yes. I figured it was an olive branch, or at least an opportunity to be in the same room and maybe, clear the air. I showed up with a bottle of wine and a store-bought cake since I wasn't sure if they'd already had one. Mom answered the door, smiled like nothing was wrong, and hugged me tight like she hadn't just helped write me out of the family legacy. Inside, Tessa and her fiancé Greg were seated at the table, laughing with Dad over something on her phone. They barely glanced up when I walked in. I set the wine on the counter, and Mom motioned for me to sit. It was normal for exactly 3 minutes. Then Tessa leaned forward, grinning, and said, "Oh, you'll never guess what we're doing next week. We're meeting with an interior designer." I blinked. "For what?" She tilted her head, mock confused. "For the house, obviously." Dad chuckled. "Tessa has a great eye for this stuff. She wants to redo the kitchen." I stared at him. "The kitchen's fine." Tessa shrugged. "Not really. The cabinets are from, like, 2002. We're thinking navy blue with gold fixtures. Something more modern. Plus, we're knocking down the wall between the kitchen and the dining room. Gonna open it all up." I laughed, thinking it was a joke. No one else laughed. Greg added, "Yeah, we already got a quote. It's a bit steep, but it's an investment, right?" An investment. Into a house I'd kept afloat for nearly a decade. I put my fork down. "And when were you planning to tell me this?" Tessa rolled her eyes. "Aaron, it's not really your concern. You're just staying in the guest house. Just staying. Just staying." I looked at Mom, then Dad. Neither met my eyes. "Tessa," I said, my voice low, "you wouldn't have a house to remodel if I hadn't been paying the taxes on it for the last 9 years. She raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, but you lived here rent-free. That was the deal, right?" I shook my head slowly. "There was no deal. I did it because Dad asked me to. Because you all needed help." Dad finally spoke. "Son, no one forced you to pay those taxes." Mom added, softly, "We're grateful, really. But the house was always going to be hers." There it was, said out loud. "Not ours. Not both of yours. Just hers." Tessa's face lit up like she'd won something. "See? It's not personal. It's just how it worked out. It took everything in me not to stand up and walk out. But I didn't want to give them the satisfaction. Instead, I sat through the rest of the dinner like I was watching strangers play out some sitcom version of my life. Mom asked me about work. Dad talked about football. Tessa showed off her ring again and mentioned how they were planning a wedding in wine country. Every sentence was a reminder that I didn't belong, that I was no longer considered family, just furniture. After the dinner, as I was leaving, Mom walked me to the door and said quietly, "You know we love you, right?" I didn't answer, because I didn't believe it anymore. The next week, I got an official notice in my mailbox from the county. Final property tax warning. Pay by October 15th, or the property would move into the foreclosure process. I stared at the envelope for a long time, debating. A big part of me wanted to protect the house, not for them, but for my memories, for the kid I used to be. But I learned the hard way that memories don't pay mortgages and loyalty doesn't earn you a seat at the table. So I shredded the notice and poured myself a drink. Let them figure it out. I was in the middle of researching new places to live when I got a call from my uncle, Dad's older brother, Ray. He was one of the few people in the family who actually treated me like a human being. We'd stayed close over the years, and he always had a blunt, no-nonsense way of speaking. "You free to talk?" he asked. "Yeah. What's up?" He hesitated. "I was over at your parents' last night. Your sister was bragging about the remodel. Said she's footing the bill because she's going to inherit the place anyway. I asked what your share was. She said, get this, you're just a squatter who got lucky." I didn't say anything. Ray continued. "So I asked your dad why they'd do that to you after all you've done. You know what he said?" I swallowed. "What?" He said, "Aaron's always been too soft. He doesn't need much. Tessa's the one who needs support." The line went silent for a moment. Then Ray added, "You're not soft. You're just decent. And that's a quality they never deserved." That conversation broke something in me. Not in a dramatic, movie-ending kind of way. More like a quiet severing. Like a rope that's been fraying for years finally snapping. Not with a bang, but with a whisper. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just stopped hoping they'd ever see me differently. A few days later, Tessa knocked on my guest house door. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the better of me. She was dressed to the nines in business casual, like she'd just come from a photo shoot for Young Professionals Monthly. "Hey," she said, fake smile already loaded. "What do you want?" She crossed her arms. "So, we're getting the permits next week. For the remodel." I said nothing. "And since the construction crew needs access to the driveway, we're going to need you to park on the street. Also, they might need to use the guest house bathroom while they're here, just FYI. I laughed. Like, actually laughed out loud. You want me to let strangers walk through my place while you tear down walls in a house I paid to keep? She blinked. Well, you don't own it, Aaron. So yeah, that's how it works. I stared at her. You know what, Tessa? You're right. I don't own it. And with that, I closed the door in her face. That night, I made a phone call. Not to a friend. Not to a lawyer. To a realtor. Because if I was going to be erased from this family, I wasn't going to do it quietly. I was going to sell them a story they'd never forget. And the best part? They'd written every chapter themselves. It's a strange thing, realizing you've been written out of your own family's story. It doesn't happen all at once. It's not like someone hands you a final script and says, here's the part where you fade into the background. It's a slow erosion, one memory, one ignored sacrifice, one smug smile at a family dinner at a time. And yet, when I finally stepped out of the guest house for the last time, it hit me like a full-body cold. I moved out on a rainy Tuesday morning in late October. No one came to say goodbye. Tessa was probably too busy picking backsplash tiles for her dream kitchen. My parents didn't even text. Not even a let us know you got there safe. Nothing. And still, some messed up part of me waited. Stood outside my car, holding the last box of things, hoping maybe Dad would come outside and give me one of those stiff, reluctant hugs. Or Mom would peek out and say something motherly. Some last breadcrumb of affection to make it all feel less final. But the porch light never flicked on. So I drove away. I wasn't proud of where I landed. A one-bedroom apartment on the second floor of a creaky old building near Midtown. The plumbing made a choking noise every time I flushed. My upstairs neighbor had a chihuahua that barked like it had PTSD. The walls were thin enough to hear the couple next door argue over everything from overdue bills to who left the freezer open. But it was mine. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was borrowing space in someone else's life. Still, I won't lie and say I bounced back right away. That first month was dark. I was tired in a way I didn't even know how to explain. Not physically, emotionally, spiritually. Like I'd run a marathon in circles only to find out I'd been chasing nothing. I kept replaying everything. Every time I'd helped them, covered a bill, drove Mom to the doctor, cleaned the gutters, shoveled the driveway when Dad's back went out. Every time I'd stepped up while Tessa wasn't available. And for what? So she could end up on the deed of a house I kept alive, while I got a pat on the head and a reminder that you're not the type who needs much. That line stuck with me. I wasn't the type who needed much. What did that even mean? That I didn't need security? Respect? Ownership? A sense of belonging? It wasn't just the house. It was the erasure of everything I'd given, and the unspoken belief that I didn't deserve more. And for a while, I started to believe them. I started to believe that maybe I really wasn't the type who got to have nice things. That maybe I was only good for filling the gaps left by other people. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. It gives you clarity. With no one left to impress and no one left to disappoint, you finally get to ask the question, what do I want? I didn't have the answer right away, but I started small. I signed up for therapy. Not the kind where you lie on a couch and talk about your childhood for years. I found someone practical, no nonsense, someone who called me out when I tried to make excuses for my family. Her name was Erin. She was sharp, dry, and had this incredible ability to pinpoint the real issue beneath whatever I thought I was mad about. We spent the first few sessions just unpacking guilt. The way I'd absorbed everyone else's needs and ignored my own. The way I'd mistaken loyalty for self-neglect. You keep calling them your family, she said once. But from what I hear, they were more like landlords. And you were the unpaid maintenance guy. I laughed bitterly. Pretty accurate. She leaned forward. What happens when a landlord stops taking care of a tenant? The tenant moves out. Exactly. That stuck with me. Therapy helped, but so did getting my finances in order. For years, I'd been channeling extra money into the house. Property taxes, groceries, home repairs, emergency fund contributions. I wasn't broke, but I'd never prioritized saving for myself. Now, with no one draining my energy or wallet, I started budgeting like a man possessed. I opened a high-yield savings account, rolled over my old 401k, started setting aside 40% of my income. I even built an emergency fund that covered 8 months of expenses. By January, I had something I hadn't felt in a long time, breathing room. I started cooking again. Real meals, not just frozen pizza and drive-thru. I discovered I actually like trying new recipes. I even bought a decent chef's knife and started watching YouTube channels about meal prepping and high-protein lunches. Every Sunday became reset day. Clean the apartment, prep meals, plan the week. It was grounding in a way I hadn't expected. And slowly, I started to feel capable again. Work, too, took on a different energy. Without family drama draining me, I had more bandwidth. I started volunteering for projects, offering suggestions in meetings, mentoring some of the newer hires. One of my managers noticed and pulled me aside after a client presentation. "You've stepped up a lot lately," she said. "You ever thought about going for a senior role?" I hadn't, but now I was. I applied for the promotion a week later. In the meantime, I began leaning into the things that made me feel me. I'd always had an interest in real estate, not the HGTV fantasy kind, but the investment side of it. Rental properties, flipping undervalued homes. I started devouring books, watching online courses, even networking in forums and local meetups. It started as curiosity, but it grew into something more. Maybe, I thought, just maybe, I could do what my family never let me. Own something. Build something. Not for them. For me. The turning point came in late February. I got a text from an old college buddy, Malik. We hadn't talked much in recent years. Life had happened, but we always clicked when we reconnected. He was living in Reno now and had just inherited a duplex from an uncle who passed. The place needed work, and Malik didn't have the time or know how to fix it up, but he didn't want to sell either. "I remember you were into this stuff," he texted. "You want to help me fix it up and split rental profits?" I stared at the message for a long time, and then I replied, "Yes." That single decision became the seed of something bigger. I took a few vacation days and drove to Reno to walk the property. It was a mess, peeling paint, outdated wiring, avocado green kitchen tiles, but it had good bones. Over the next couple months, I helped manage the renovation, brought in contractors, sourced materials, even got my hands dirty on demo day. I'd never felt so alive. It was hard work, but it was mine. By May, we had tenants lined up and rent checks rolling in. It wasn't a life-changing amount of money, but it was a start, a symbol, proof that I could build something for myself without anyone else's permission. Meanwhile, back in Sacramento, my parents' dream house was quietly falling apart. How do I know? Because the foreclosure notice hadn't just been a threat. It was real. They'd defaulted on the property tax bill, twice now. Apparently, Tessa and Greg had assumed someone else would handle it. According to Uncle Ray, who still kept me in the loop, the notice had escalated. There was talk of liens, talk of legal proceedings. Suddenly, the Golden Daughters designer kitchen didn't matter as much as the giant red stamp on their door. But they hadn't called me. Not once. I figured they were still clinging to pride. Or maybe they just couldn't bring themselves to admit that the person they'd dismissed, ignored, written off, was the only one who'd ever kept them afloat. I didn't care either way, because by then, I'd found something better than their validation. I'd found freedom. I'd stopped measuring my worth by their yardstick. I'd stopped showing up in spaces that only valued me for what I could provide. I'd learned how to say no, how to choose myself, how to protect my peace without apology. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone who'd been pushed out of a home. I felt like someone who had outgrown one. Still, I won't pretend I didn't feel something twisted when I heard what happened next. The funny thing about walking away from something is that once the grief fades, and it will fade, even if you think it never will, it leaves behind something a lot more useful: clarity. Clarity about who people really are. Clarity about what you actually want. Clarity about where your boundaries are and what happens when someone crosses them. For me, that clarity didn't come in some dramatic burst of insight. It came in layers. Slow, patient layers, like someone wiping years of dust off a window. And by the time I could finally see clearly, what I saw was this. I'd spent years being the invisible backbone of that house. The guy who fixed, paid, mowed, installed, ran, organized, and covered for a family that didn't just forget to say thank you. They made sure I never felt entitled to one. And they thought I'd just fade away quietly. They thought I'd move on, lick my wounds, and disappear into some modest, low-risk, low-reward life where I'd never question how I was treated. They were wrong. By early June, a lot had changed. The duplex in Reno was pulling in steady rental income. Malik and I were already scouting for a second property, this time closer to home. My job? Promotion locked in. Pay bump secured. I wasn't rich by any means, but I had margin. comfort, breathing room, and more importantly, options. That's when the opportunity fell into my lap. It came in the form of an email from a friend, someone I knew through a local real estate meetup group. She'd heard I was interested in distressed properties and tax liens, stuff most investors ignored because of the legal complexity. The email was short. Hey, not sure if you're still looking for local deals, but there's a pre-foreclosure property in East Sacramento going through lien proceedings. Not officially listed yet, but should go up for auction by fall unless someone pays off the back taxes. Could be a good one if you know what you're doing. Address below. I clicked the link and saw the address. My parents' house. I stared at the screen for a full 30 seconds. Then I leaned back in my chair and just smiled. The universe had just handed me a loaded weapon and said, "Here you go. Do with this what you will." At first, I wasn't sure what to do. I'll be honest, I wrestled with it. A lot. Part of me thought I should walk away. Let the system do its thing. Let them fall on their own. But another part of me, the part that remembered standing in the doorway with that last moving box, waiting for a goodbye that never came, knew better. They didn't deserve a silent collapse. They deserved to know exactly what they'd done, to feel it. So I started planning. First step, research. I pored over every public record I could get my hands on. The tax lien on the house was serious. Almost $28,000 in unpaid property taxes, penalties, and interest. The county had issued a final notice of default. If it wasn't paid within 90 days, the property would go to auction. And here's the kicker. Because the house had been signed over as joint ownership between my parents and Tessa, all three names were now liable for the unpaid taxes. That meant if the lien wasn't settled, the foreclosure would affect all their credit scores. Greg's too, if he was on any shared accounts with Tessa. They were going to learn that co-owning a house comes with real consequences. Second step, paperwork. I contacted a real estate attorney I'd worked with during the Reno duplex renovation. Her name was Rachel, and she was sharp, fast-talking, and didn't play games. When I told her the situation, she raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want to go through with this?" she asked. "I'm not looking to punish them." I lied. Rachel smirked. "You're not looking to punish them." I shrugged. "Let's just say I want to be prepared." She walked me through the process. Because of how California handles tax-defaulted properties, the county would first offer the deed to the lien holder if the taxes weren't paid by the final deadline. If that failed, the house would be placed in a public auction, and whoever won would assume ownership, clean slate, assuming they paid off the owed amount and met the legal conditions. I told Rachel I wanted to track the lien closely, and if no one paid it off in time, I'd like to participate in the auction anonymously, through a trust or LLC. She nodded. Discreet. I like it. Can we make that happen? She smiled. Absolutely. Third step, the bait. Now, I didn't just want them to lose the house. That would be too simple. Too clean. No, what I wanted was for them to realize what was about to happen and know they couldn't stop it. So I started reaching out through back channels. Not directly. I wasn't dumb, but I made sure the word got back to them. First, I ran into an old neighbor, Mr. Hayes, while grabbing coffee near my new place. We chatted for a bit, and I let it slip that I'd been working in real estate lately, that I was eyeing a few properties for potential acquisition. "Oh," he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Anywhere nearby?" I sipped my coffee. "Actually, yeah. There's one not far from where I grew up. East Sacramento. Nice yard. Needs work. Lots of potential." His eyes widened just slightly. The man was a gossip grenade, and I'd just pulled the pin. 3 days later, Uncle Ray called. "I heard a weird rumor," he said. "Yeah. Word is someone's looking to buy your parents' house. At the auction." I feigned surprise. "Oh, didn't know it was that far gone." Ray paused. "You didn't?" I let the silence hang. "Hope everything's okay over there." He exhaled. "They're trying to keep it quiet." Tessa's furious. She thought Greg had been paying the taxes, but apparently he thought your dad was. It's a mess. I almost laughed. It was the golden trinity of entitled dysfunction. Nobody responsible. Everybody blaming everyone else. Exactly what I expected. Now came the final step, letting them sweat. I didn't reach out. I didn't send a warning. I didn't offer help. I just waited. I knew the deadline was mid-August. I knew the auction date was already scheduled. I knew the lien was still unpaid. But I also knew my family. And sure enough, the panic came right on schedule. It started with a voicemail from Mom. "Hi, honey. I know we haven't spoken in a while, but I was just wondering if you had a moment to chat sometime soon. Nothing urgent. Just would love to hear your voice. I didn't respond. 3 days later, Dad called. Twice. Left no message. Then, finally, a text from Tessa. You're seriously going through with this? I stared at the message for a while. So she knew. I replied. Going through with what? Her response came back within minutes. Don't play dumb. I know you've been poking around. The auction is in a month. You think this is funny? I waited a full day before replying. No, I think it's fair. She didn't reply, but Greg did. You're ruining our family, dude. Our family. Right. The same family that once locked me out of a house I paid to keep. The same family that left me off the deed like I was some stranger renting a couch. The same family that gaslit me into thinking I didn't need much. I didn't reply to Greg either, because it wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. For the first time in my life, I was holding the cards. I was sitting at the table they never let me join, and they knew it. And the best part? They still didn't know what I was really planning to do if I won that auction. Because I wasn't just going to take the house. I was going to make sure every inch of it reminded them exactly who kept it standing all those years, and exactly who let it fall. August 14th arrived with no fanfare. No last-minute miracle. No Hail Mary wire transfer from Tessa or groveling text from my dad. The deadline had passed. The lien stood unpaid. The house, the same house I grew up in, the same house I kept alive like a fool for nearly a decade, was going up for public auction. And the people who called themselves its owners were about to learn a lesson in accountability they wouldn't soon forget. I attended the auction in person, though not as Aaron Underwood. Rachel, my attorney, had helped me set up a shell LLC weeks in advance. The name on the paperwork was Evergreen Haven Investments, which sounded exactly bland enough to go unnoticed. We had all our legal filings in order, bank verification done, and our bid limit set. I had no intention of losing. The auction was held in a cold, fluorescent-lit room in the county municipal building. A handful of local investors showed up, some with clipboards and printed Zillow comps, others with poker faces like they'd been flipping houses since the Clinton administration. Most of them had no idea what they were bidding on. A few saw the address and probably thought, East Sacramento? Decent neighborhood. What they didn't know was that I'd already had a contractor friend do a walk-around of the property 2 weeks earlier. The place was in disrepair. Not because of age, but because of neglect. Half the shingles on the roof were curling. The grass was 2 feet high. Paint was chipping off the siding like old bark. The sprinklers had stopped working. The front porch was starting to sag. Tessa's precious kitchen remodel? Never even started. Apparently, the designer pulled out after they failed to pay the deposit. It was poetic. The auction started. The opening bid was set at $19,500, roughly 60% of the total lien. Several investors jumped in early, bumping the price up to $25,000 within seconds. That's when I made my move. Rachel raised her paddle on my behalf and calmly placed a bid of $40,000. Silence fell across the room. The other investors glanced at each other. That number was just high enough to kill the profit margin on a flip, and the property wasn't in good enough shape to warrant a higher long-term hold strategy. One guy, a flipper I recognized from the forums, raised his paddle to $42,000. Rachel didn't flinch. 50, she said smoothly. That was it. The room folded. A few people whispered. One muttered, not worth it, and scratched the property off his list. The auctioneer banged his little wooden gavel. Sold. Evergreen Haven Investments. $50,000. I signed the papers 30 minutes later. 30 minutes after that, I became the legal owner of my childhood home. The kicker? Because it was a tax-defaulted auction, the previous owners didn't just lose the property. They had no legal right to reclaim it. No equity left. No profit. No negotiation. Nothing. They were out. Completely. And I was in. The next day, I drove over to the house. I didn't knock. I used the key Rachel had picked up from the county offices, the legal key, tied to the new deed, my deed. When I stepped inside, I was hit with the smell of dust, stagnant air, and something sour underneath. The furniture was all still there. Same old couch with the worn-out cushions, same dining table where I'd eaten hundreds of meals, mostly in silence. But now it looked foreign, like a stage set, like someone had tried to recreate a home but didn't know where the heart was supposed to go. I found a stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter. Utilities, credit cards, A contractor invoice with the word delinquent stamped in red. Tessa and Greg were nowhere to be seen. Neither were my parents. They'd cleared out, probably out of shame or anger or both. I walked through the house room by room, pausing at the door of what used to be my old bedroom. It had been painted over, some generic off-white color, but I could still see the tiny dents in the wall where my old bookshelf used to rest. For a moment, I felt something twist in my chest. Not grief, not regret, just finality. They'd made this bed. I was just turning down the sheets. A week later, I served them all with notices. Not eviction notices. That part wasn't necessary. They'd already left the property on their own once they realized the game was over. What I served them were certified letters from my attorney's office, formal notices informing them that due to unpaid taxes, their names had been removed from any ownership of the property, and that any attempt to claim occupancy, access, or ownership of said property would result in legal action. The letters were worded carefully, coldly, clinically. No room for misinterpretation. Tessa tried to call me the day she received hers. I didn't answer. Greg tried to email, of all things, with a subject line that just said seriously, delete. But Dad? He showed up. I was out front trimming the overgrown hedges, earbuds in, when I saw the familiar silver Toyota Camry pull up. He parked across the street and didn't get out for a full 2 minutes. When he finally did, he walked slowly, like every step was a wait. He looked older than I remembered. Hey, Aaron, he said quietly. I took out one earbud. Hey, you got the house. I nodded. Yeah, legally. Clean title. He looked down at the sidewalk. I didn't think it would actually happen. You didn't think someone would pay the taxes? He didn't answer that. We stood there for a long time. Then he said something I didn't expect. I was wrong. Just like that. No excuses. No long-winded explanation. Just those 3 words, hanging in the air like smoke. I should have done right by you, he said, voice barely above a whisper. We should have. You carried us. I see that now. I kept my face neutral, but my hands clenched the shears tighter. And Tessa? I asked. She see it. He gave a small, bitter chuckle. She thinks you cheated her. That tracked. I said nothing. He looked up at the house. You planning to sell it? I shook my head. No. I'm turning the guest house into a rental unit. Fixing up the main house, room by room. Maybe I'll live in it for a while. Maybe not. He nodded slowly. It's yours to do what you want. Yeah, I said. It is. He turned to go, then hesitated. For what it's worth. I'm sorry. I didn't reply. Because he didn't deserve forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I didn't need that anymore. I didn't need him to get it. I'd already won. 6 months later, the house was unrecognizable. New roof. Fresh paint. Polished floors. Clean lines. The yard had been landscaped into something magazine-worthy. I'd installed solar panels, re-insulated the attic, and even redid the kitchen. Except this time, it was my design. No navy blue and gold. Just warm wood tones, matte black fixtures, and a coffee nook by the window that made every morning feel like peace. The guest house was already occupied. A traveling nurse named Denise who paid her rent on time and always brought fresh-baked banana bread whenever she renewed her lease. And me? I lived in the main house. Alone. Content. Every now and then, I get word about my family. Tessa and Greg were renting a condo 2 towns over, bleeding money. Her credit was wrecked. His business had folded. Dad had picked up part-time work at an auto shop. Mom was still pretending everything was fine on Facebook, posting old pictures, tagging us in throwbacks from 10 years ago like we were still some happy sitcom family. But none of them had stepped foot near the house again. They knew better. Because this wasn't just a house anymore. It was a monument. A quiet, brick-and-wood reminder of who had kept it standing when no one else cared to. Of who had been written out, and then returned with the pen. And every time I walked through that front door, keys in hand, lights flicking on, I remembered the day I first saw that foreclosure notice taped to the glass. The panic in my father's voice. The silence after I answered. And the sentence that started it all. Ask the homeowner. Now, they knew who that was. And that made it worth everything.